and whole things.
Yeah.
I call her an earth mother.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Monday morning coffee chat. Usually I just have one guest on, but my one guest today is actually three guests. Today I'm being joined live from Scotland and Bermuda by the Scottish Blethers. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Hello.
So I had originally talked to Liz about coming on to chat with me, but then you guys have started this wonderful podcast together. So we thought it'd be kind of fun to get everybody together and chat a little bit. So for those of you who are watching, if you haven't noticed, Guide Collective, all three of these lovely ladies, Susan, Liz, and Helen, are members of the Guide Collective. And they have a podcast called Scottish Blethers, where they blether on about whatever comes to mind, topics about Scotland, but about life and whatever else is on the plate for that day. So we thought it'd be kind of fun for you guys to get to know them and to hear a little bit about Scotland and also Bermuda, because that's where Susan is coming to us live from, even if it looks like she's coming to us from a field.
Indeed.
So I guess my first question is, how do you guys know each other?
Well, I'll start that one off. We're all Scottish Blue Badge guides, professional guides in Scotland. And Liz and I know each other before that because we live in the same village in Fife. And Susan we've known her since she became a Blue Badge guide, Susan.
Indeed.
How long have you been?
I've been a guide, qualified since 2014.
So
I'm 2012.
And I'm very old. I'm 28, 2008.
2008. Okay.
So I'm 12 years in the making as a guide.
So since you got your Blue Badge guides, then that's when you started your lives as tour guides, or were you tour directors before that? Did you work in tourism prior to getting your licenses?
No, none of us in tourism. Education and business was the background. So it's a new chapter. But this year we found ourselves not guiding. And so the idea came, what do we do best? What can we do? And we chat well, we blether. So that was where the idea.
You can't stop us.
You'll notice how we're all kind of hanging back, watching each other's faces, because we all want to dive in.
And we never get to...
Go ahead.
And we never get to see each other's faces when we're doing the blether, when we're recording the podcast, because we're just doing it over audio. So we don't actually get the visual clues that we're getting today. So we're a little bit, how's this going to work with the visual clues?
But what we do
have lots
have,
of fun.
Yeah, what we do have is a line in front of us, which gives the volume. And so we've got a lot of outtakes or bloopers. And flatlined, Helen, you're flatlined.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No, I can't hear you yet. Can you hear me, mother?
Well, this has been such an interesting journey because I know Liz has started with the Guide Collective at the very beginning, back in April. Yeah. And I know that technology was something that you were a little bit not comfortable or really into. And now you're sort of a trailblazer. You put together this great podcast and you've owned it.
Well, that's Susan. Susan's the technology side. I think it was the social media side that I didn't really get, but there's been nothing else for it. So this is something that I've learned. But no, it's definitely, we each have our own roles that we play within our collective. And I'm the wordsmith, but Susan's very definitely the techie person, and Helen's anecdotes.
And Helen's definitely taking on social media. We teeny face rune.
So for the people that are out there watching, they may not know what a Blue Badge guide is. So Helen, can you tell us a little bit about how it is that you become a Blue Badge guide and what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's very interesting. In Scotland and in Europe and in England, we have Blue Badge guides, and these are the professional guides in each of the countries. And to become a Scottish Blue Badge guide, we do about 18 months to 2 years part-time study. In my case, it was the University of Edinburgh. I think we're all University of Edinburgh, part-time, and studying all sorts of things, history, geology, architecture, archaeology, culture, all sorts of things relating to the country. And although it's a part-time academic course, it really works out as a full-time course because you spend the in-between times going out and visiting and getting to know every nook and cranny of your country. It's a wonderful course. I did it as a kind of a interlude between kind of a really busy, hectic full-time job and moving into retirement, in inverted commas, a wonderful bridge and to the best job in the world.
Well, I would agree that being a guide is definitely the best job in the world. I think that there's nothing that's more enjoyable for me, but it isn't for everybody, is it? I mean, I think that that's kind of the tricky part about being a guide. Liz, what do you think is the hardest part for you? Because you were an educator, you worked for University of Edinburgh. So what has been the hardest part of getting to know this new job for you?
Absolutely nothing. This is the job that's absolutely made in heaven for me. This is the job I've been waiting for. People follow you around and say, gee, this is wonderful, Liz, this is amazing. And if you've come from a background in academics, in academia, I wasn't an academic, but administration, everybody, their role is to criticize and tell you why you can't do something. So no, there's no downside to this. I love every minute of it. Absolutely found my niche in life.
I would second that, Liz. There is no downside to it.
No.
Well, I've been doing this 20 years. This is my 21st year. And even if it didn't turn out to be a year where I actually got to do my job, but I definitely like it more than being an architect, that's for sure. So, and
I suppose,
go ahead.
sorry, I suppose the downside is not for us. The downside is actually for your family and friends, because once you're a guide, you've got to tell everybody everything. So, you're driving around and you're going, people pay good money for this. Listen to what I'm telling you.
Well, I got around that by having two children that are so habituated to me doing that. They do that to each other now. We were driving down to my parents this weekend, and the two of them were basically lecturing each other. So, they've gotten so used to me do it that they do it now too. So Susan, how did you come around to being a guide? What is your backstory?
I worked for the whiskey industry for 10 years and got made redundant, moved into HR and did training for a few years, was a bit like the other two ladies, a bit of training in there. And then I went back to the whiskey industry and I decided that I wanted to move away from the city and back to the country. And I live in a beautiful part of the world in Highland Perthshire with a loch or a lake on my doorstep and lots of walks. So I decided to retrain while I was still working and used my annual leave to try out guiding. And pretty much that was it. After 2 long weekends with French groups, I was like, this is it, I'm off. Thanks very much. And I resigned in time for the beginning of the next season. And I love it. You work 7 months of the year and you have 5 months off. What's not like to like about it?
Well, and where do you go when you have your month off?
I tend to go to Bermuda for about 3 months over the winter because my other half is Bermudian. And it's nice because it means I do actually get the Scottish summer weather in another country. So it's probably, kind of 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit in Bermuda. The water's a little cooler, but with a wetsuit, you can still get in. So it's just like being in Scotland. There are the odd days when it's a little bit wet. But no, I love coming to Bermuda and I'm just coming to the end of a stint here just now. So I've got a couple of weeks left and then it's back to a cold, dark midwinter in Scotland. But that's fine. I can put on my fire and get out and about in the hills and the forests, which is what I miss when I'm here.
Yeah, I've been living in Seattle for, I don't know, more than 25 years. And I have to say that I'm originally from LA, so I love the sun. But I'm starting to understand the Scottish love of the dark, actually, because you kind of enjoy. In a way, it's like, oh, okay, I actually get 3 months a year where it's acceptable to stay home all day and read.
Yes.
That's pretty wonderful.
I know it's very hard here. It's hard here when it's sunny and you've got the Scottish mentality that says, if it's sunny, you have to be outside. And of course, you've got all this work to do and you're like, yeah, but it's sunny. I should be outside. I shouldn't be inside playing on my computer in Bermuda. And it's really hard. You get that kind of challenge going on in your head.
That is super funny, actually, because that's a super typical Seattle thing, is that if it is sunny like today, there is sun. And I can assure you, everybody in Seattle is going to be outside doing something, raking leaves, walking. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter that it's 35 degrees outside. They're all going to be out there in shorts. So there's...
quite funny, Sarah, when I first was coming over to Seattle, I've got a high school friend who lives in Seattle. And I emailed her and said, Sheila, I'm coming over. What's the weather like? This was in January. What's the weather like? What should I wear? She wrote it back, one word, Scotland. So the weather in Seattle and the weather in Scotland in her mind was absolutely the same.
But we're actually in a really strange position at the moment, because although Helen and I live in the same village, we can't actually see each other. And so the only way that we communicate is by technology. And so we might as well be in Bermuda. You know, if we could, we would be there. We keep
Feel
on
free.
saying we're going to have the Scottish Blethers conference, the annual conference in Bermuda. But we're not locked down, but we're not allowed to gather in each other's homes or whatever. So we don't see each other in real time.
No.
Oh, so yeah, that's sad. I mean, although I suppose it's the same here for Thanksgiving this past week. Nobody was able to really go and, well, we were not supposed to go and gather in people's homes, even if it was a holiday. So it is a holiday today, though, for you guys, isn't it?
Yes.
It's St. Andrew's Day.
And what is that? Tell me.
Right, well, I'll kick this one off, will I? St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland, and the 30th of November is down as his Saint's Day. The legend has it that that is the date that he was martyred, but we know that calendars changed during the course of things. But the 30th of November is St. Andrew's Day. The reason St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland is that in about the 4th century, his relics were being looked after in Patras in Greece, and St. Regulus or St. Rule heard that in a vision that the relics were going to be taken away, and that he had to take the relics to the ends of the earth. And at that time, he set sail, and the ends of the earth was Scotland. And he landed on the east coast in a little place called Kilrymont. And there he kind of, set up a shrine to St. Andrew, and pilgrims began to come, and the place was still known as Kilrymont. Eventually they decided that really St. Andrew is the main attraction here. We'll call the town or the area St. Andrews. So that is the founding of St. Andrews, which of course now is almost much more famous as a town where people come to play golf. The Royal and Ancient, or the Old Course, or the university that Prince William went to. So
yeah, that was what was in my mind. I'm not a golf person, but I do remember that's where
Prince William went. And that's what people come to St. Andrews for. But I like to remind them that of St. Andrew. But there is another pilgrimage that I take to St. Andrews, and that is for ice cream. They have a wonderful ice cream parlor at Janetta's. And that is my pilgrimage.
And if people are interested and want to hear more, this was actually one of the topics. Our last episode that came out last Tuesday was on the saint, the saltire, which is the Scottish flag, and the Psyche. So
blue and white one.
The blue and white one, yeah. We each take a topic and we do a little bit of research on it, as Helen did there, and we tell people about our topic, but then we just go freestyle. So we just all pile in with our views. We try to get at least one topic that's a bit lighthearted. So we're there to inform, but basically to entertain and amuse people as well. So if you're interested, the Saint, the Saltire, and the Psyche was last week's episode.
Well, because of course we've got our Scots words of the episode as well. So you can learn some Scots while you're at it. Prepare for your trip to Scotland. Learn the lingo.
All right, teach me a couple of words.
Okay, so sometimes it might be a little bit damp, and you might say the weather is a bit dreich.
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 And you've got to get your
Dreich. That's hard.
Or if you're out in the rain, you might get wet. You might get drookit.
Drookit.
Yeah,
but it never rains.
Wet.
It never rains in Scotland because it's offy bra.
Coffee brawl. Is that like moist or soft or something like that?
Awful bright, awful nice,
bright
awful
beautiful.
bright and beautiful brawl.
Okay.
And
So
sometimes if you go into the town, you might say, "Oh, the town was fair hochen."
Fair hochen. Okay.
Fair hochen means it was very busy, full of people. Fair hochen.
Fair hochen. Okay.
And Sarah, how would you pronounce our capital city?
Edinburgh.
Very good.
Oh,
very good.
yes.
Right.
What
Beautiful.
about our second city?
Your second city is Glasgow.
Oh, well done.
Yes, that's good.
You've,
You do
you've
know
travelled.
my
You've
last name is
travelled here.
Murdoch, right? So
Yeah. No.
theoretically, I am originally Scottish, I think, right?
Right. Well, at least you can
Excellent.
pronounce Edinburgh, because a lot of people, of course, say like Pittsburgh, they say Edinburgh. But in Edinburgh, someone from Edinburgh actually sort of kind of condenses it. So they would say, I'm from Embra.
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 Embra. Oh,
Embra.
Embra. Embra.
Embra. All right.
Yeah, but you got it exactly right, because it's tonal. I used to travel in China quite a wee bit, and people would pick me up and say, why do you say Edinburgh? And you go up at the end, so it's Edinburgh. So it's got a sing-songy Edinburgh.
I think it's a beautiful name. And actually, for me, I think that's one of the most beautiful cities in the UK for sure. I mean, I think it's got the most dramatic landscape, the way it's situated on the hills and Arthur's Seat and got the Royal Mile.
We should explain, sorry, Susan, do you want to explain what's going on in the background behind the hill?
You can hear all that.
What's
Our fridge freezer broke 4 days ago, and if you're living in the tropics, it can make life a little bit difficult. And there was a new one to be delivered this afternoon, but we didn't know when they were going to deliver, and I'm afraid it's just been delivered. So that's what all the noise is in the background. I'm very sorry.
It sounds as if there's more Highland coos coming over the hill.
I thought it was because you guys do a podcast and you had like sound effects that you were throwing my way.
Oh, we do have sound effects, but Susan's very clever at eliminating those sound effects.
Although I'm leaving more of them in now, because it's a lot more fun leaving all the bloopers and stuff in. Wait till next week's tomorrow's episode. There's a lot of bloopers in that one.
So what is tomorrow's episode on?
Tomorrow's episode is favourites. So the first one of the month, we've started doing our favourites, and we're talking about lochs, or lakes, as some people call them, although we only have one major lake in Scotland, and that's the Lake of Menteith. And we basically take you through the blockbusters of the lakes or the lochs and what we like about them, talking about our favourites, where our favourite ones are for a walk. Obviously, you can't talk lochs without talking monsters. So you've got Nessie and you've got Morag in there. And if you don't know who Morag is, you'll need to come and listen to it when it launches tomorrow. And we just chat away about our different lochs and the different areas where we live and the different places we like to visit.
And also with some of those, we've all got memories of Scotland going back many years. And we like to just blether about, oh, do you remember when we did this or when we did that? And it's lovely.
And of course, Susan doesn't remember any of it. Here we're completely different generations. So Helen and I will blether about something and Susan goes blank.
Well, sometimes that happens. I can only relate in that I've been to Scotland probably maybe 4 different times. So I'm not as experienced with Scotland as you are, but I did some book research there a few different times. And I would say probably of all the places in Scotland, I love Edinburgh. Glasgow is so different though. I
love Glasgow.
It's the people, it's the humor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a different country practically.
It is.
Yes.
So what do you find charming about Glasgow? What do you like about it?
The people.
I love people. Yeah. Kelvin Grove Art Gallery Museum is a fabulous place to go. It's a free museum, and it's like the film One Night at Museum. You walk in, you come to the centre aisle, you look right and you see a stuffed giraffe, an elephant and a Spitfire hanging from the roof. So you're just waiting for it all to come to life after midnight. And you look the other way and you've kind of got the expression wing where you've got all these heads hanging from the ceiling, white plaster heads that are slightly different. You have to work out how many different types of heads there are, and they put different coloured lights on them. And you've got a Dali just hanging there you can walk right up to. There's a couple of Monets, there's a Van Gogh, there's a Rembrandt, and there's nobody sat in the room watching you. You can go right up and have a really good look at these things. Glasgow, for me, I lived in Glasgow for 19 years. We've had this debate on Scottish Blethers in one of our earlier episodes. For me, it's Glasgow all the way. Sorry, Edinburgh, it's Glasgow.
Edinburgh is picture perfect. It's easy for people to access. You can just come out of Waverley Station, the only station that's named after a series of novels, and you're right into Princes Street, and you have the old town to one side, you have the new town to the other. It's easy, it's beautiful, it's absolutely stunning. when you go to Glasgow, people get off and they think, oh, you know, am I safe here in Glasgow? But Glasgow was described as one of the best Victorian cities by John Betjeman, one of the poet laureates. And with Glasgow, you've got to look about you. I mean, that's one of the sayings in Scotland, look about you. And you have to scrape the surface, and then there's so much character. And as Susan says, all our museums, our public museums, are free, and Glasgow is stuffed full of them.
And the slogan of Glasgow is, people make Glasgow, and nothing could be more true than that. The people of Glasgow are just so different, so funny, so generous, and you know, they just give you the earth. They're just wonderful. And they have a wonderful murals trail in Glasgow, where they've had fantastic graffiti artists painting. And that's where you get the story of Glasgow, because it's in all these murals, very, very sort of gentle, evocative one of the person with the man with the little robin, feeding the robin, to the one I love the best is Strathclyde University. On one of the gable end walls of a new building of Strathclyde University, they've got the lecture room of the 1960s, which is when Strathclyde became a university. And to see the boys in their suits, collars and ties sitting in the lecture room, and they're all listening attentively to the lecturer, and you're thinking, that doesn't happen nowadays. So
that's pretty impressive.
Fantastic murals, graffiti artists that they've got in Glasgow.
Well, I would say Glasgow, my impression was it's a little bit edgier for sure than Edinburgh. I do love that museum. That museum is one of the most impressive museums that I think I've been to really anywhere. It's not big, but there's something about it. Just there's something for everybody, which is great. I went for the Charles Rennie Mackintosh School, architecture.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was the highlight for me, because that's something I studied a long time ago, and that was really, really enjoyable. The one thing that was hard for me to get through in Glasgow, though, is Glaswegian, like trying to even understand
the accent.
You're not alone.
Yeah, because Glasgow was the industrial heartland of Scotland, so it had the shipbuilding and the manufacturing, and out of that came poverty, but came humour. So, you know, people in Glasgow don't take themselves too seriously, and they have a very distinctive, in fact, I was sitting with a bus driver who was a Glaswegian, in the middle of a tour. And when we were finished dinner, one of the tour members said to me, was that Gaelic that you were speaking with John? It's just about as indecipherable.
Well, it really is. It doesn't sound like they're speaking, I wouldn't call it English. You can't even really call it English. You have to listen really hard to try and understand what people are saying. But, you know, that's kind of one of the interesting things I don't think people realize about Scotland, though, is it is so culturally different, from language to just the kind of joie de vivre sort of atmosphere of Scotland versus what you find in even Northern England. I mean, you don't go so many miles over the border from York into Scotland, and it really is like it is essentially a different country.
Different planet.
Which leads me to a question for all of you. How do you feel about Scotland politically? Do you feel like it should be its own country?
Well, I go with that one because I'm absolutely clear. Yes, absolutely. I voted for it at the last referendum, and I've become even more convinced, particularly through the handling of the pandemic and the Brexit. We have a First Minister called Nicola Sturgeon, and she has been excellent. My husband will be sitting in the background there just waiting to get a word in, because we have a split household. We have civil war. But he has to keep quiet so I can say what I like. So yeah, I'm very much in favour of it.
All right, Susan, what do you think?
I have been sat on the fence. I've been off the fence one side, I've been off the fence the other. At the minute, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we should remain part of the union at the minute.
Why is that?
Because there's too much going on, and I think whilst the British system may not be perfect, and I'm definitely not for Brexit, I think that we're better together at the minute. Doesn't mean to say I won't change my mind in the future. I have voted for most political parties in Scotland at one point or another, depending on what their policies are and what I see as being their achievements. And I'm not yet convinced that Scotland has the funds to go it alone.
Gotcha. Okay, Helen, what do you think?
Right. Well, I was very definitely on the side of the union, staying within the union, but I'm changing quite a lot because of, Liz, you mentioned it, the handling of the pandemic in Scotland. I mean, I'm very, very pleased that I live in Scotland during this. I feel that we've had somebody who has been in control, and it's been a very steady ship. Albeit we've had lots of tragedy, but we've had a very steady ship, which has given confidence. Having said that, I'm still a bit like Susan. I feel that the time may not be right at the moment, but I don't know if there ever is a right time. And I think we're all going to be in terrible trouble when this pandemic is over. Every country across the globe is going to be in terrible trouble economically. And this might be, you just say, well, we're in the trouble now, so let's just see how we go. We're fortunate in Scotland is that we know that we can be an independent country because we were independent up until 1707. So we have done it and we have had everything. Okay, that's 300 years ago, but we've got a lot of building to do, but I'm kind of like that at the moment, but the balance is kind of moving towards it.
Isn't it really in your country's best interest, though? I mean, now that I know that the country has a lot of natural resources, for example. So that has, in the past, it's been sort of that Scotland couldn't survive on its own without England. But now, with all of their natural resources, at least economically speaking, Scotland probably would be okay. I mean, am I correct in that?
Well, I would say that if nothing else comes out of it, at least out of the pandemic, we have a recognition of that Britain is actually made up of 4 constituent nations, because the biggest single problem for a Scot was identity, that we were subsumed within the English. For British, read English. And of course, during the pandemic, the 4 nations all have devolved authority. So in Scotland, we have our own parliament. And so there are devolved issues, which are the preserve of the devolved parliament, whereas some are reserved, like immigration and defence. So things like public health have been devolved. And so we've been able to, social care, we've been able to go our own route. And so what has happened is Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland have all taken different paths from England. And so something like the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, which in the past would purely have given the English, is now having to recognise that we actually do have 4 different nations and they are following different routes.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because one of the evolutions that I've noticed, I mean, this is just such a silly little thing, but in all the years I've been visiting the UK, I've noticed that when you watch the news, the BBC, it used to be only the British, Oxford British kind of English that people were speaking. But now you have broadcasters with all the different accents from the entire UK, which is so interesting because that was not fashionable when I was a kid. The first time I visited, that was not... You didn't do that. But now these accents have become kind of fashionable, haven't they?
Well, you used to have to speak the Queen's English, with that nondescript posh accent. And now they've realised if they want the right talent, they need to have diversity, and diversity in so many different ways. And I think that's better. We get more regional news as well. And I know certainly when I check my BBC News app every morning, I go straight to Scotland and then I'll come back to the UK level. But do we yet have the means to go it alone? That's a big question. The price of oil is through the floor. You've got all this national debt. The Scottish government's taking on extra debt. How are we going to pay for it? And Liz, I know you're shaking your head.
I do agree though with oil, I mean, right now, everything is such a mess across the world that it just feels like
now's the time
that anybody's been waiting to make. Why not? Everything's on fire anyway.
Exactly. I mean, it's what, people always refer back to the oil. And, in the last campaign, which was a campaign run on fear and negativity by the side that wanted to remain part of the union, it was always about the oil would run out. But look what's replacing oil. I mean, we have got such resources of renewable energy whether it's wave or hydroelectric power or wind power, and water, which is going to become one of the major resources in the future. And as someone who, we were talking about the weather earlier, as someone who has to put up with rain in Scotland most days of the year, they can take my freedom, but they'll never take my water.
You're the Braveheart of the future.
Absolutely.
Well, so this, one of the things that's sort of now piquing my interest in my head is that when I am, this whole idea of local identity and accents and all of these things, when you listen to people, first of all, when you listen to people in walking down the street in any town in Scotland, when they open their mouth, can you identify where they're from?
Some accents, yes.
Yeah, broadly speaking, yes. You can know, if you put Scotland into 4 bits, you can identify which of the 4 bits they come from, but maybe not necessarily the actual town.
That's
So
really, that's fascinating when you think
if they
about
talk really fast, if someone talks really, really, really fast with quite a broad accent, you kind of know it's Inverness. If they say words like fit like, who's your dues? How are you doing? That's kind of Doric. So that's Aberdeen, Northeast kind of thing. Glaswegian, well, you can always tell Glaswegian. Edinburgh tends to be a bit of a posher accent. Dare I say it, maybe a bit like Helen's, even though she's a daughter of the rock.
Sterling. But
She's sterling.
When ladies in Edinburgh talk about sex, it's something that coal gets delivered in. Sex and coal.
It's funny, Sarah, they tease me about being a daughter of the rock because I was born and brought up in Stirling. And we've talked about Edinburgh and Glasgow. And Stirling, if you think of a triangle, Stirling's at the top and Edinburgh and Glasgow are equidistant on either side. So I can sit nicely there and just like Edinburgh and like Glasgow. But yes, my mother actually sent my sisters and I to elocution lessons because my mother and father were brought up in Dundee, which has got a really harsh accent.
I love it.
And but she sent us because she didn't want us to have a Dundee accent. And so we all went to elocution lessons. But my father we used to go through to our, my father's parents and his uncle, and my father did the business for his Uncle Davy, who was Broad Dundee, and it didn't matter if any of the 3 of us were in the same room because it was a foreign language they were speaking, because my father went into Broad Dundee and Uncle Davy was in Broad Dundee, and there was just no way you could get through that. That was very difficult.
Okay, Helen, so tell us how you would say you want 2 pies, one with onion in it.
2 pears, ain't an onion in it.
That's the famous Dundee.
2 pears, ain't an onion in it.
See, this is so fascinating because, in the United States, I'm from Los Angeles originally, so I think they consider it to be no accent, because that's the television accent. That's what, but really I could drive for 4, 5, or 6 hours and the people would have essentially the exact same accent. The only time you really see a huge difference is between the coasts, but that's thousands of miles. And I have found it so fascinating traveling within the UK because after being there a while, you start to go, you have a South London accent. You have an Edinburgh. I mean, you can start to actually pick it up, which is really kind of fascinating. My grandmother was from Liverpool, so I know the Cockney accent. If I hear that, I'm like, you're from Liverpool. Like I can hear it immediately, which is so interesting. And I wonder, I know that at least when I was a kid, that accents really did pin you to social class. Do they still do that? Does that still pin you to a social class?
I think maybe to recount it in a story. When I came down from Elgin, I used to live up in Elgin on the Murray coast, and came down to Dunfermline. I taught in a college of further education, and I was saying to the students about how lucky they were living in Dunfermline compared to the students who were doing the same course living in Elgin. In Elgin, you'd had to leave home to get a job because you'd have to travel. But in Dunfermline, you're within easy reach of Edinburgh, Glasgow, Perth, Stirling. And I was saying this to the students, and one of the students said, "Oh, would never go even as far as Kirkcaldy. That's 20 odd miles along the road, still in Fife. We stay in Dunfermline. And she said, my brother went over to Edinburgh to work, and he's come back with a very strange accent.
But I think
that's like
I think,
30 miles.
yeah,
Not
I
even.
think that there's been a definite revival in the Scots language, because as we've been saying, there's such a diversity of dialects within the Scottish language. So in another recent episode, what we were looking at was, we did a favourite author. It was one of the favourites ones. And we were talking about children's books, and there's been a revival in children's books being written in the Scots tongue. So things like the Gruffalo, and what else was there? Robert Burns and whatever. So when I was at school, if you used the Scots language, it was considered slang. Yeah. So you were corrected for using that. Nowadays, they're very, very much promoting Scottish dialects.
So it's
and
not.
It's quite interesting, because in this week on our Facebook page, we've actually posted the Gruffalo's child being told in Scots by somebody
I had no idea that was a Scottish story. I read that story to my children when they were little. I didn't realize it was from Scotland.
It's not, but they've taken it and put it into the Scots tongue. So they're telling the story in the Scots tongue.
Wow.
And signing as well. So it's totally accessible for all children.
So then is Scottish then its own language?
Yeah. Well, you've got the different forms, like the Glaswegian. So you would say that the Ouija language was inaccessible to you. It was like a different language. Yeah. The Doric up in Aberdeen is one of the hardest to understand. So although they're all basically English, you've got Lowland and you've got Highland, you've got Gaelic as a different language completely. So it's just how broad they are in that dialect as to whether you can understand them or whether it is a different language.
And Gaelic was never the language of the whole of Scotland as we know Scotland today. Gaelic was very much the Highland and the west of Scotland. But in the lowlands, it was Scots. If you think of Robert Burns, he writes poetry in Scots, which sometimes people find it quite very difficult to understand. But interestingly enough, the census form asked us the last time, do you speak? And it had English, Scots, and also had Gaelic. So when they were saying Scots, they were looking at Lowland Scots, the one that we're talking about just now. So, and you'll still find that very much the language of the country, the rural areas. Go to an agricultural show or a sheepdog trials, very difficult to understand the farmers because they're all speaking Scots.
Wow.
I just did an interview this week with a girl that came across from Denver, Colorado, and she was traveling around Scotland with her sister, and her grandmother had been Scottish, and she'd been left a keepsake box, and that had been her catalyst to come to Scotland. And she knew that she wanted to stay here, but she needed to get a job. So she got a job on a farm, a sheep farm, and she eventually married the shepherd, and they now run layout working sheepdogs, which is one of the highlights of any tour to Scotland. The tour members absolutely love it. 30 sheepdogs, what's not to love? It's just puppies everywhere. So I interviewed her this week, and she was saying that in the beginning, she couldn't understand a word that Neil, her husband, was saying. She just used to have to nod and think, am I doing the right thing here? And yet when she's being interviewed, she comes away with all the Scots words, like the braes for the hill, and so she is and she was saying that what her family say is that when she goes onto the phone home, they say, you're speaking like a right Yank, because she goes back to her natural.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you want to use the language that you're hearing around you. So tell me something. I see behind you, Susan, the heriku. So if you could you talk a little bit about that, because I know that's one of the things that when I was in Scotland, sort of was, I don't know, I just had never heard about it, and then I saw them and I thought they looked like big shaggy dogs. So tell us a little bit about what that is.
So this is the Highland cow, or the Highland coo, or the Hieland coo as we call it, in behind me. And you'll see these ones are black, and then, hold on, if I go the right way, you might see the ginger one. Uh-huh. There's also blonde ones as well. And these were the beasts that were used all across the Highlands because they're so sturdy and they're able to eat food that other cows or sheep couldn't exist on, so that, you know, they can take something with the smallest nutrient content and turn it into food for themselves. This photo was actually taken up at Allerdale Wilderness Reserve up near Tame, so about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Inverness in Scotland. And this was in April a couple of years ago when I was up there with a group from Visit Scotland. So the cows themselves would be kept by the family on the land, and you could never tell which colour you were going to get. And actually what this farm were trying to do at Allerdale was they were trying to breed in lots of black ones and trying to get rid of the gingers, and it didn't work because, hey, we've still got a ginger there looking at us. And the ginger colour was bred right through the flock in the 1800s because Queen Victoria saw them and thought, that's a very nice colour. So everybody, of course, wanted to get into Queen Victoria's good graces, and they started breeding more and more ginger into it, whereas before they'd have been black and they would have been blonde as well. Now, there's a word in English that's called black male. What could that be from? Could that be from one of these guys behind me here? So it was said that Rob Roy was a bit of a cattle rustler, and he would say, oh, you've got a lovely fold of cattle here. You know, do you want me to look after them and make sure nobody steals them? And if people didn't pay him, then funnily enough, those cows would disappear in the middle of the night. And this is possibly where the origin of the term blackmail comes from, because if you don't give me your money, I'm going to sneak away with your blackmail cattle. So Highland cows, they have a beautiful meat, a very marbled meat, not so much fat in it, very lean. It's very good for you. And they are lovely beasts. And there is a girl who's only about 15, 16, lives just across the other side of the loch from me. And she's got a grant from the government to start her own fold of Highland cattle. She's got two. She's got Brew the Coo, which is the name of one of her cows. And then I can't remember the other one. I can't remember. She's got a ginger one and a black one, and they're beautiful, and they're lovely, and they're great eating as well.
It's interesting to me that they're so prolific there because they can only eat whatever they can find, which sort of reminds me of when I was in Scotland and I was going kind of across the upper part of the Highlands. It's pretty desolate, isn't it? I mean, when you get north of Inverness and up towards Stirling, it's desolate. So, I mean, would you recommend people going into to visit those parts of Scotland that are so desolate? Yeah.
I'm not sure desolate's the right word. No. I think they're wilderness areas, but they would have been filled with people up until the 1800s, which is when people were basically cleared off the land. It leaves for a fairly sanitized, I think is probably the best way of putting it, landscape these days. And there's lots of different programs going on. So at Allerdale, they're doing a lot of rewilding, and they're basically trying to keep the deer out from certain areas and grow more native trees like the Scots pine. But I mean, in 12 years, they've grown about 3 feet because of the poor soil that there is there. So they have to keep the deer out to bring them on. But oh gosh, yes. I mean, to me, some of the best bits of Scotland are where you see nobody and you can go for big, long walks. And we've got a great outdoor access code that says, as long as you're not doing any damage, you can walk along that road, that path. You can go up that hill that's in behind me, as long as you don't do any damage. So we've got this great access code that you don't have in the States. And you can go down that river. You could kayak down that river if you wanted, you know, anything like that.
That's kind of like that mass trespass idea in England then, is it?
So England still has a law of trespass, but Scotland doesn't necessarily. We have an outdoor access code.
It's called the right to roam. So we have the right to roam apart from certain private land, which is designated. But for an example, some years back, there started to be signs that appeared in lay-bys saying no overnight parking. And it was to stop motorhomes and caravans parking up on the side of lochs and whatever. And somebody took that to court and challenged it. And there had never actually been the right to put those signs up there. So they've all been taken down. So literally, as long as you're not doing any damage, you have the right to go anywhere in Scotland.
Wow.
Not necessarily motorised.
Individuals who own sort of lands or houses have the right to have a certain amount of privacy.
Yeah.
They're allowed to have a boundary with privacy, but the right to roam means that you can walk right and round that boundary and go on. It's a wonderful thing. And going back to, would you advise people to go north of Inverness and that sort of quieter? In my head, that is people's perception of Scotland, is the open spaces, the wild, the rugged mountains. And of course, you've got to remember our mountains are very small in stature, but very, very complex. That recently, I think it was this week, a great mountaineer in Scotland, Hamish Mckinnis, died aged 90. And he has revolutionized mountaineering across the globe with some of his innovations. He grew up in Glencoe, and people, big alpine climbers, many of the names of the climbers that the names of have all trained in Glencoe, because that's where they get accessible piece of rock or ice, which is as complex and dangerous and difficult as you'll find anywhere in the Alps, but you can drive and just walk in and be at the foot of it within 30 minutes.
Wow. So go ahead. I was just going to say, how would you guys suggest for people that have never been to Scotland? I mean, obviously the things that we think about are the cities. We think about going to Glasgow, we think about Edinburgh. Maybe if you have time and you're adventurous, going to Inverness, which is kind of a long slog out there, maybe going up to the Isle of Skye or Oban. But outside of those things that are really, most people know, what would you say is the best approach to get to know those wild areas?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that investing in a guide is really, really worthwhile, because it's stunning scenery, and you can get one of there's lots of tour companies which will take you up to the Highlands and back down to the Central Belt in a day. But you can easily tick off on your list, I can do Inverness, I can do Skye, I can do wherever. But to understand Scotland, it's to understand its story. So it's to know why the land was cleared, how it was cleared, to know what the contemporary issues are, because there's a huge debate in Scotland at the moment about land reform. At the moment, we have Scandinavians who are buying up Scotland lock, stock and barrel, because a lot of the Highlands of Scotland are big estates and no one has money in Scotland at the moment. So there's a particular gentleman called Anders Poulsen who owns one of the biggest web retail outlets, and so he has bought now 15 Highland estates, and every one that comes up he buys it, and his great passion is rewilding. So instead of putting the deer off the land, instead of keeping the deer on the land and having heather moorland, he is putting the deer off and he's allowing it to go back to nature. So it's very contentious, because of course the heather moorland and the grouse shooting and the deer are part of the rural economy, and so people are being put out of jobs. So you think of the Highlands as being quiet, sleepy backwaters, but they're not. They're a hotbed of contentious issues.
Helen, what would you say? What would your suggestion be for people that's off of the beaten path to visit in Scotland?
Well, I think as Liz said, I think that if you're going off the beaten track, it does really enhance your holiday to have a guide, who knows it. But I love going up the west of Scotland, up the west coast and along the top, and go over to the islands. They are just stunning. And in fact, there are sometimes I've been on the Western Isles there and on the beaches, and you've got this pure white sand, these turquoise seas, and I have been there when the skies have been blue and the sun has been shining, and you could be where Susan is. You could be in Bermuda or in the Caribbean. It's just absolutely stunning. The people are just so lovely and so interesting to talk to. But up there, I just love it. And I think to do bed and breakfast and go into the small sort of guest houses or bed and breakfast places where you can actually speak to the locals, but they're always really very happy to speak to you and tell you about places, and they can direct you to places that you might not know. But I think a guide is, as Liz said, to understand why the country is as it is today and what the people think of it and what the people are trying to do is fine. We can all look at landscapes and think that's lovely, but what does it mean? but a guide can help you interpret what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Susan, what are your picks?
I would say you've got to decide whether you're going to go by public transport or whether you're going to go by a vehicle. I think you can do so much more by it if you have a vehicle that you're prepared to drive. But remember, we do have single track roads. That doesn't mean one lane in each direction. It means one lane with little lay-bys or little pullovers where you can pass each other. So you have to get used to reversing. You have to get used to driving on the other side. Remember, left is right, right is wrong. So you need to stick to the left-hand side there. But in terms of places to go, you can do little walks. It doesn't matter how able you are. There are paths that are designed for everybody. You can walk anything from 10 minutes to a viewpoint up to having a full 8-9 hours in the mountains. And for me, it's a case of get out there, stay somewhere local, somewhere small. And especially given COVID, what I would do now is I would probably stay one place in the Highlands for a week and do day trips from there, because most places in Scotland you can get to within an hour and a half to 2 hours drive. So if you pick somewhere in the centre, like Pitlochry, where I live, you can get to Edinburgh in an hour and 15, you can get to Glasgow in an hour and a half, you can get to Inverness in an hour and 20 minutes. So, and you can get to the West Coast in an hour and 40 minutes. And there's so much you could see and do, but pick one place and do kind of circles out from there. There's lots of things to see locally. People will give you their recommendations. Get out for a walk. The minute you see the sunshine, make sure you're outside. Don't be in a museum because it might not happen again.
15 minutes, go outside.
Yeah, exactly.
All these ideas, and actually talking about the staycations, that's going to be my approach to the things I'm going to offer next year. And gosh, I hadn't thought about doing something in Scotland. Now you have me like thinking that would be a lot of fun to come up and hang out in Scotland with you guys and do a staycation sort of tour. So
well, that's, sorry, just to do the plug, but what we're hoping to do once a month through January onwards, we're going to do a virtual tour. So we're going to go off the beaten track and do a virtual tour through Scottish Blethers. But over the last few days, we've been thinking that what we're going to do is actually lead actual tours, small tours of slow tourism. So we'll divide it up 14 days all together at the beginning and the end, and then we'll each take 4 days. So it's going to be 3 different locations and slow tourism. So really getting to know a place, doing the day trips, and you've got the 3 of us. So if you don't like one, you've always got the 2 others.
So we change coming along.
cool idea. So you're going to do a 2-week tour of Scotland, and then there'll be 3 guides for the 2 weeks. That's a really
but only instead of putting the cost up by having all 3 of us, it'll be 3 guides, but just 1 guide in 3 different places.
That's really cool. So just to give you all the plugs that you need, so people that are watching, if they haven't met you guys yet, Liz, you run Jaggy Thistle, and what are you going to be doing for actual tours when tourism starts up?
Okay, well, next year I have one already in the pipeline that I'm hoping will go ahead in May. So that's looking, it's I have discussions at the end of this week about that one. But then I'm going to do one of Christmas in Scotland. So at the moment on my Facebook, I should have been leading a group of tour guides. There was 24 of us. We went to Turkey before and they were coming to Scotland. So yesterday was the start of it. We should have been in Edinburgh today. So I'm doing it at the moment, posting up one photograph of what we should have been doing. And I'm hoping to do that as an actual tour next year.
Wonderful. Well, I might have to join you on that one. We'll have to see what happens. Susan, what is your business? What do you do your own tours?
Yes, so I've got Scotland Tour Guide on Facebook and Instagram, and my work is very diverse. I've got quite a lot of corporate tours for next year. So if anyone's looking to bring their top performers on holiday or as a little incentive for the business meeting, obviously, I do some of that. I am also looking at potentially renting out my house and doing the slow tourism from there. So I've got 2 ensuite bedrooms, and it means people can manage their COVID safety. They can stay in the one place. It's all going to be beautifully cleaned, and we'll do day tours from Pitlochry. And that means we can hit most parts of Scotland. Also available, obviously, for going to my favourite part of Scotland, which is the Outer Hebrides and the west coast of Scotland. That was my mum. Just got that into me from a very early age. It was a nice day. We're going west. Amazing seafood, amazing scenery, amazing walks, fabulous place.
So if people wanted to do something, like if there were two couples that wanted to come and just stay with you for a week,
Yeah.
and they could do stuff with you. That's really cool. And
Yeah.
Helen, what are you planning on doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be doing, I have a Facebook page, Tour Scotland with Helen. And mainly it will be, when I'm doing it, off on my own, I will be doing it sort of staying in one place and going out from that place. It might be that there's 2 or 3 centres within the time, but that would be it. I also do driver guiding, so I hire an appropriate vehicle and drive people around Scotland. So if it was just maybe one person, be a smaller vehicle, but if there's 4 or 6 at max, I would have a big 8-seater and just tour that round. And just
People can hire you for just even
sorry?
People can hire you even just for a couple of days if they're coming.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
That's cool.
And
So
that
you guys are like a full service Scotland exploration team, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely, yes.
Very cool. And so there's another way for everybody to get to know you guys. You have an event coming up. Is it December 9th? Am I right?
It is.
All right, tell me about that.
Go, Susan.
And so we are having our little Christmas get together via Zoom, and it is on the 9th of December, 8:30 p.m. UK time, which is 4:30 Bermuda, 3:30 New York, and I can't quite remember what that is.
12:30.
12:30 Pacific. And we're basically inviting people to come and join us on a Zoom session. And we're going to have lots of Christmas games, and Helen and Liz have been putting it all together at the minute, and it's just going to be lots of fun.
We've got everything from Guess That Christmas Carol with a Scottish connection to spell that Scottish place name. So lots of fun. And the tickets are for sale on Eventbrite. So although there's no charge, it's free. We're limiting the numbers. So if you want to get in there fast, and it's on Eventbrite, Scottish Blethers Christmas Party.
How many people are you going to limit it to?
We're going to limit it to 30, and it's our first attempt at a party on Zoom. So we want to get to, we feel that we know a lot of the people who've been listening to the podcast and who've been communicating on social media. So we hope that they'll sign up for it, because we feel as if we know them, but we haven't actually met them.
Fine.
So
Okay.
there's going to be the opportunity for interaction with the people on, who come to our party, that it won't be us blethering, it will be, as Liz said, the games, but there will be an opportunity for the people who come to our party to actually do some speaking as well, if they wish, telling us about themselves.
Broadcast, or is it just going to be a private Zoom?
It'll be a private Zoom in the first instance, if we can master the technology, because it's me this time that's doing it, not Susan. So it's edgy. But if we can master it, we will record it, and then we'll put up the recorded version. So it's just a toe in the water. I've done some virtual tours before with this group who are traveling with me on next May. So I have tried it, but this is taking it a sort of stage beyond. So we'll give it a go.
Fantastic. Well, so if everybody's watching, if you guys want to join the Scottish Blethers, I may drop in. We'll see. I would love to join you. That sounds like an awful lot of fun. So free, and it's December 9th, and you said 12:30 Pacific time?
Yeah. 8:30 UK time. Yeah.
Okay. And so the best way to find Scottish Blethers, Susan Brown, Liz Lister, and Helen Houston, is Scottish Blethers Facebook page. Is that right? Do you guys also have a web page now?
We have
Not yet.
Instagram, not quite got the web page yet, but we've got the Instagram and we've got the Facebook page, and we're on Twitter just as @Scottish Blether, but the other two are Scottish Blethers with an S on the end.
Okay. And
Of
what
course,
days?
you can find us on Guide Collective as well. We're all contributing to Guide Collective, so we're all there.
Exactly. And you have a new episode coming out almost every week. Is that right?
Yes, every week. Tomorrow is the new one.
So Tuesdays, you'll find a new episode of Scottish Blethers. And
Yeah.
what's the topic tomorrow? You already mentioned it.
It's favourite locks. It's
Favourite
episode 14, favourite locks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you ladies. And we went blethering on a little bit, so that was nice. I got my experience of being a Scottish blether, even if I'm not Scottish. So I hope that everything goes really well with your party. I will definitely try to make it to your
Thank you.
And
thank you for having us.
yes, it's absolutely a pleasure. You guys should come back anytime. And Liz, you and I have a date in time. Is that right?
What date is it?
I think
When do
it
we
was
have?
Wednesday, we said, didn't we?
Right. Okay. Right. So, okay. Yeah.
So, well, it may be
that's fine.
Wednesday, but Liz and I
We might have to have a chat about that, but yeah.
We'll have a chat about it. But Liz and I are going to sometime this week celebrate St. Andrew's Day by tasting gin. And she's going to tell me all about how to taste gin. And I have a few different ones that I can try, kind of like Colin and I did with the Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, brilliant.
So one day this week,
Okay.
Liz and I, just as a little preview, we'll come and do that. So anyway, thanks everybody for watching today. Thanks for joining us for another coffee chat. All kinds of fun things coming up this week. And tomorrow, starting on Guide Collective, because it's December 1st, we have the Guide Collective Advent Calendar starting, which I know you ladies are participating in. We're going to have something every single day, either an article, a recipe, a live event. So tune into Guide Collective starting tomorrow for lots of holiday fun. So we'll see y'all again next week on
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheery bye.